You ever notice how we're obsessed with living in the moment? Be present. Stay here. Stop overthinking. Entire industries have been built around the idea of shutting your brain off. But then there's this very specific type of person, the one sitting right across from you, nodding, seeming engaged, and already 3 moves ahead of a conversation that hasn't happened yet. The one who warned you about a problem 4 months before it became one. The one who already knew how the meeting was going to end before anyone sat down. And here's what nobody wants to tell you. Their psychology might be the most underestimated and least understood way of operating in the world. Let's start with what defines them. They always think in consequences before acting. And I don't mean they're cautious or slow. I mean their brain automatically maps outcomes the way other people map directions. Picture this. It's Tuesday morning. You're in a meeting with important stakeholders. Someone proposes a new strategy. 7 people in the room are reacting to what was just said. One person already saw this proposal coming 3 weeks ago, already simulated 4 versions of how the meeting would unfold, already identified the one variable everyone else is going to miss, and is now deciding whether it's worth saying something or whether it's wiser to stay quiet and watch how things play out. That person isn't arrogant. They're not trying to draw attention. They just can't help it. By the time most people are processing what just happened, they're already working on what comes next. That's not strategy. That's wiring. And that constant forward motion ended up rewiring the way they move through the world. It taught them that the present moment is a data point, not a destination. You don't just react to what's in front of you, you extract from it. Every conversation, every decision, every offhand comment gets filed somewhere and cross-referenced against a mental model that's always running. Psychologists call this prospective cognition, the brain's ability to simulate future scenarios based on current information. Most people access it occasionally. These people live in it permanently. That's why they seem unnervingly calm in a crisis. Not because nothing affects them, because they already ran this scenario. They already know what the next step looks like. They were ready before anyone knew there was something to be ready for. Quick side note, I recently launched this channel to explore human psychology, behavior, and the hidden mechanisms behind social interactions. We're still at the very beginning, so every subscription really means a lot. If this kind of content helps you better understand people and the way the human mind works, consider subscribing. It really helps me continue and create even more in-depth videos. Thank you, and let's continue. But here's where it gets more complicated. These people weren't born with this ability. Many of them grew up in environments where reading ahead wasn't a skill. It was a survival requirement. The child who learned to scan a parent's face the moment they walked through the front door, not out of curiosity, out of necessity. The teenager who figured out that anticipating consequences before acting was the only way to stay safe in an unpredictable home. The message arrived early, and it's now hardwired into them. If you don't see it coming, you don't get to be surprised. You just get hurt. Psychologists call this hyperactivation. Your nervous system gets shaped to live in the future. And that's not the case for most people who are focused on the present. These people couldn't afford it because in certain environments, staying in the present was simply too risky. This is exactly why they're so hard to read. Not because they're secretive, because they're operating on a timeline nobody else can see. They sit in a conversation and say almost nothing because they've already projected into 4 possible directions, ranked them by probability, and decided which one they prefer. They don't react, they respond. And there's a specific pause before that response that other people misread as hesitation. It isn't hesitation. It's processing. It's the difference between someone who fires and someone who aims. They aim. every single time. Then there's the pattern recognition. People who always think several steps ahead don't just think faster, they think differently. They notice what doesn't belong, the one word in an email that doesn't match the tone of the rest, the person in the meeting who went quiet at a specific moment, the contract that looks fine on paper but has one clause nobody flagged. But where does this come from? Try spending entire years in situations where missing the signal had real consequences, where you learned that the most important information is almost never the most shocking thing you heard. These people became fluent in that space, in what's not being said, in the gap between what you're being told and what's actually happening. And in a world that rewards whoever spots the pattern first, that fluency is worth more than anything else. However, having foresight, recognizing patterns, staying several steps ahead permanently comes with consequences nobody talks about. These people are difficult to be around. The brain doesn't clock out. It runs scenarios at dinner. It runs scenarios at 4 in the morning. It runs scenarios during conversations that don't require scenarios. Then comes the loneliness. You see something coming. You say it out loud. Nobody believes you. Then it happens exactly the way you said it would. And instead of being believed the next time, you just get a reputation for being negative or paranoid or difficult. Research shows that individuals with a strong future-based orientation have higher anxiety rates than the norm. Not because their thinking is wrong, but because being right about negative scenarios in advance doesn't make them any easier to carry. Let's talk about relationships now, because their social interactions with others are quite particular. They don't trust quickly, not because they're cold, because they've already run the projections. They watch how you behave in the ordinary moments of life because they know perfectly well that everyday actions are where the real pattern lives. They notice when you say you're going to do something and don't. They notice if your story changes slightly between two tellings. They notice if your energy shifts when certain topics come up. They're not interrogating you, they're collecting data, and once they've collected enough, their trust is virtually unshakable. But until then, you're still a variable, and they don't commit to variables. There's a paradox at the core of these people. They're simultaneously the most valuable people in any room and the most likely to go completely unrecognized for it, because their best work is invisible. They prevented the problem that never became a problem. They took action or asked the question that changed the direction of a decision before anyone realized the original direction was wrong. They flagged the risk that everyone dismissed until it wasn't dismissible anymore. You don't get a standing ovation for the disaster that didn't happen. You don't get credited for the version of events that never occurred. Their contribution is most visible in its absence, and that requires a very specific kind of person to be okay with. Most of them learned to be okay with it a long time ago, not happily, just practically. Let's talk about how they handle being wrong, because it happens, and their relationship with it is complicated in a precise way. They don't handle being wrong the way most people do. Most people are wrong and move on. These people are wrong and need to understand exactly why the model failed, what variable they didn't account for, what assumption they made that turned out to be incorrect, because being wrong isn't just an outcome to them. It's a data point that needs to be integrated. They update the model, they recalibrate, and then they move forward with a more accurate version of how things work. Psychologists call this high epistemic humility combined with high analytical drive. They're not defensive about being wrong. They're methodical about learning from it. Professionally, these people tend to be underestimated. Because of that, the recognition usually comes too late, because their gift is invisible until suddenly it isn't. The colleague who seems quiet in every meeting until the next meeting where they solve the problem in 3 sentences. The employee who never seems urgent until the moment everything becomes urgent, and they're the only one who already has a plan. Research in organizational psychology consistently shows that individuals with strong prospective thinking are perceived as more valuable by their teams after a crisis. That wasn't necessarily the case before. It takes a breaking point for most people to understand what they had access to the whole time. Their relationship with information is different too. They don't consume information passively. They interrogate it, where it came from, who benefits from it being true, what would have to be false for it to be accurate. They were doing this long before media literacy became a talking point, not because they're cynical, because they learned very early that taking information at face value was a luxury they couldn't afford. When you grow up in an environment where what you're told and what's actually true don't always match, you develop a very specific relationship with claims. You verify, you cross-reference, you wait, and you almost never share a conclusion before you've tested it from at least two angles. Here's the truth. People who are always several steps ahead might be the last ones who truly understand what it means to be patient, to resist the immediate reaction, to sit with uncertainty not because they're comfortable with it, but because they know that moving before the picture is clear costs more than waiting. They're not better than other people, just calibrated differently, shaped by multiple combinations of different environments and temperaments, a brain always running slightly ahead of the moment it's physically standing in. They're not trying to be the smartest person in the room. They never cared about that. They're just incapable of turning off the part of their brain that's already in the next room. And in a world full of people reacting as fast as they can, someone who already saw it coming stands out in a way that's hard to name but impossible to ignore. And honestly, that's the whole thing. People who always think several steps ahead aren't trying to stay ahead. They just never learned how to stay behind. If this resonated with you, if you recognize someone in this or recognize something in yourself, leave a comment. I read every single one.